So recently, I've become a huge Percy Jackson fan. I love the original series, I love the Heroes of Olympus, and so far, I love the Trials of Apollo. I love all Percy Jackson content, except for those horrible movies. The Percy Jackson films are despised by those that had read the book, and I am now among that group. That being said, looking at it through the lens of a film student, this movie isn't necessarily a badly made movie. If you haven't read the book, it's an okay film. The writing is probably the weakest part of it, but from a filmmaking standpoint, it's pretty well made. It was actually directed by one of my favorite directors, Chris Columbus, who was of course the one to bring the Harry Potter series to life, directing the first 2 movies. I have made an entire video praising him on how well he adapted the Harry Potter series, so it pains me to bash him in this video. But that being said, I think that most of the blame goes to the screenwriters, because, as I said, this is not a badly made movie. The thing that makes it bad is that it's a terrible adaptation. I would even go as far to say that these movies disrespected the original books. They have blatant disregard for the characters, the plot, the rules of the universe, and overall, they just sort of made it their own thing that's loosely based on the book, which in my eyes is a real shame. Rick Riordan, the author of the series, has bashed this movie, and rightly so. His vision from the novel was lost in translation. Rick even went as far as emailing the studio trying to get them to fix it. Here's a short segment from that email. The script as a whole is terrible. I don't simply mean that it deviates from the book, though certainly it does that to the point of being almost unrecognizable as the same story. Fans of the book will be angry and disappointed. They will leave the theater in droves and generate horrible word of mouth. That is an absolute given if this script goes forward as it stands. But the bigger problem is that even if you pretend the book doesn't exist, this script doesn't work as a story in its own right. Even after this email and several others, the studio ignored him. And what do you know? Everything that Rick said would happen did. So as a fan of the Percy Jackson series, I decided to make a video explaining why and how this film disrespected the original books. I've spent the last 3 days simultaneously reading the first book and watching the first movie, going through all of the differences. And it took a long time, about 13 or 14 hours. I gave up my whole weekend. But it will be worth it because I've wanted to make this video for a while now. For this video, I'm only talking about the first movie. I'm gonna do a separate video for the second movie because I'll have to do the same thing, simultaneously reading the second book and watching that movie. Before I really get into it, there are going to be spoilers for the first book and movie, so there's your warning. Now, let's get into it. Let's start with the characters. These characters are so far from the characters from the books. With Harry Potter and the Hunger Games, it's gotten to the point where I actually picture the actors from these movies while reading the book. But this is not the case for the Percy Jackson series. First and foremost, they are high schoolers. In the first book, Percy and Annabeth were both 12 years old, Percy having just finished 6th grade. Aging them up is even worse, because as the story goes on, the Great Prophecy, the prophecy that the whole series is based around, is about a 16-year-old. A half-blood of the eldest god shall reach 16 against all odds. But here, they actually passed that age and are 17. It's also very inaccurate that Percy would still be alive this long, because 11 or 12 is the age when monsters really start to sense you if you're a demigod. Aging the kids up was a cheap way to try to appeal to teens, but most teens enjoy the series the way it is. This was another thing that Riordan addressed in his emails, basically begging them not to age the characters up and make them 17 for the same reasons that I said. I understand that a decision has been made to age the main characters in the film to 17. I don't know if you or your staff have had the chance to read further than The Lightning Thief in the Percy Jackson series, but there are 4 other volumes. The series is grounded on the premise that Percy must progress from age 12 to age 16, when according to the prophecy, he must make a decision that saves or destroys the world. But again, they didn't listen. And I personally love the fact that he called them out for not having read the rest of the series. The fact that they disregarded Riordan's wishes, but also had not read the rest of the books in the series makes me sick to my stomach. No wonder this movie turned out so badly. The ages of the characters weren't the only thing that they screwed up. They screwed up their personalities as well, especially for Percy. Taking a look at one scene in the museum. In the book, Percy actively tries to listen and be respectful to Kyron teaching, and he even tells Nancy Bobofit and her friends to shut up when they were talking over him. In the movie, however, he's literally doing the very thing he told others not to do in the book, having headphones in, rolling his eyes, and not listening to a word Kyron was saying. This is one of our first impressions of Percy, and instead of making us like him for being respectful, they make the audience dislike him for being a jerk. Then they continue this cycle throughout the movie. In one scene, he yells at Kyron, refusing to help him.
This is your problem, alright? Not mine. This is about your world, not mine.
Meanwhile, in the book, Percy jumps to help them even though he's terrified to do so. This shows the true Percy Jackson. He's selfless, but in the movie, they made him selfish. Now let's go over Grover. The casting choice for Grover was atrocious. They casted this super confident guy, and they basically made Grover unrecognizable, both physically being way too old and personality wise. At least Percy is somewhat like his character, but Grover is not even close. In the book, Grover has no confidence in himself. That's the point of his character. He was extremely hard on himself for failing to save Talia, and later for failing to protect Percy and his mother. He failed both missions, making his confidence level drop so much. At one point in the book, he literally broke down crying, telling Percy how badly he felt about failing Talia. Adding to that, Grover is super down to earth. In fact, he's the definition of down to earth. His goal in life is to find Pan, the god of the wild, and clean the earth up after the humans trashed it with pollution. This is what I wanted to see, this emotional, not so confident, and down to earth guy. But instead, we get this loud, obnoxious, and pretty confident ladies man, which is the last thing I wanted to see for Grover.
The daughters of Aphrodite. Okay, alright guys, you guys got a lot of catching up to do. Their mother's the goddess of love, so you know where that leads. Hey, baby!
Grover is the opposite of a ladies man in the book, especially at this point in his journey. At one point in this book, he literally said that girls are harder to understand than the spirit of Delphi. There's also so many lines in this film that book Grover would never say, like that one line at the museum.
On several occasions, they would come down to Earth and,
Hook up?
This line is made even worse too, because his job is to keep a low profile and protect Percy. But by saying this, he's just drawing attention to himself and the person he's protecting. I also hate the line where he talks about busting Gabe up with his crutches.
He's just mad because I busted him up with my crutches.
It's just so awful and so far from what Riordan wrote for his character. And don't even get me started on the Lotus Hotel scene. Not only do they show Grover dancing in the most cringeworthy scene in the whole movie, but they show him hitting on all these women, and they even throw in a stupid gag where he asked all of the women to marry him.
Dude, we heading to the chapel. We getting married. Wait, which one of y'all proposed to?
It's like they didn't even read the book. I also found it so stupid that they made Grover not have his horns yet, but had to earn them.
Frankly, I'm just a junior protector. I don't have my horns yet.
He's a freaking satyr. He should have been born with those horns. In the book, he was not trying to earn his horns. Like any satyr in any story, he had them already, but they just hadn't grown all the way. The thing he was trying to earn was his searcher's license so he could go find Pan. But God forbid they add anything that had to do with Grover's love for the earth, the very thing that defines his character. At no point in the story do we see Grover get vulnerable, show his down-to-earth personality, or show his insecurities, and it's a real shame. Moving on to Annabeth. In the book, she had blonde hair and gray eyes, but they casted someone with dark hair and blue eyes. But I can forgive that because I honestly love Alexandria. What I can't forgive is the way they wrote her character. They made her this tough warrior who was all about fighting, almost like she's the daughter of Ares, the war god, like Clarice. In the book, her first appearance was her healing Percy back to health after he passed out. It shows that she's a caring and kind person. But in the movie, both her first and last scene show her fighting like she's this tough, unbeatable girl. They even throw in a line where Grover says that she would crush Percy.
What's her name? She would squash you like a bug.
But Annabeth is the daughter of Athena, not Ares. The strength that she got from her mother was her brain and her strategizing. There's a scene I want to talk about, and that's the capture the flag sequence. First of all, in the book, Percy and Annabeth were on the same team, but here they pit the two against each other and again try to show her as the strong warrior. But in the book, she wasn't like that. Instead, she used her wits, came up with a strategy, and used Percy as bait so Luke could get the flag and they could win the game based on her strategy. She didn't use brute strength, she won with her brain like a true daughter of Athena. This scene is even worse because they blatantly disregard the source material. In the novel, Kyron clearly says that there is to be no maiming, but a child of Ares breaks the rule and cuts Percy on the arm. But in the movie, they have Annabeth break the rules, cutting Percy even more times than the Ares child did in the book, and she then proceeds to yell at him to get up.
Stand up and fight.
proving even more that they were trying to make her like a child of Ares. I guess they were trying to make up for the fact that Clarice wasn't in the story, but this is not the way to do it. You can't change a character because you cut another one out. This is a common thing to happen in this movie, and I'll talk more about it later in the video. Now that we've gone over the three main characters, let's talk about their dynamic in the movie. It's honestly a terrible bit of writing. First of all, when Percy leaves for his quest, he refuses to let Annabeth and Grover come with him.
I don't need your help, okay?
And we just see Percy be a straight up jerk again.
Look, I'm not asking for your permission.
But in the book, Percy is so appreciative that the two of them came with him, and he thinks to himself how grateful he is to have them. This is the real Percy. He's not this cocky jerk who thinks he can do everything on his own. He doubts himself, and his friends are there to lift him up. The fact that they messed up perhaps the best friendships in the story is just awful. Another moment that I was really disappointed they cut, which I thought really showed the bond of their friendship, was right before Percy's big fight. Annabeth gave Percy her Camp Half-Blood necklace, which also had her father's ring on it, and Grover gave him a tin can that he had been saving, his way of saying that he and the satyrs were behind him. Not once in this movie did I feel the connection between these three that I felt while reading the book. Luke is another character that they butchered. First off, I was very disappointed that they did not give him his scar. It symbolizes why he hates his father. His father sent him on this quest that Hercules had already completed, which made Luke furious, and on that quest he got his scar, which he blamed his father for. It shows the root of his problems with his father and the gods in general. They also show his hand way too much. They are not subtle. They make him a jerk from the very start, talking about how great technology is, and he tells the heroes to kick his dad's ass if they see him.
You see my dad on the highway to hell?
Yeah?
Kick his ass for me.
It sort of gives away the plot twist of Luke being bad because he's a jerk from the start. In the book, Luke comes off as this charming, nice, and friendly guy. That's part of what makes him so great as a character. He's a master manipulator. Everything he does that seems like he's helping them turns out to be him tricking them in the most sneaky way. He's so charming, in fact, that at one point, Percy says he blushed almost as much as Annabeth did when talking to him. They really lowered the bar for Luke, making him this cheesy villain who actually loses in the end. In the book, Luke comes out a winner. He tricks everybody, including Kyron and a literal god, Dionysus. He sends the Hellhound after Percy without anyone knowing it was him, which was of course cut from the movie. He smooth-talked a god, making Ares do what he wanted, which was also cut from the movie. And in the end, he poisons Percy and then escapes. And again, cut from the movie. Also, the whole fight of Luke versus Percy was another blatant disregard for the source material. There's a reason why Luke didn't fight in the book. When Percy tries to get him to fight, Luke is too smart for that, saying, "Nice try, Percy, but I'm not Ares. You can't bait me." Making him fight in the end and losing diminishes the whole point of his character and the threat that he would later go on to be. Kyron was another character that I think the screenwriters really messed up. Maybe not as severely as the others, but I had some real problems with his arc in the movie. First of all, let's address one of the lines that Riordan addressed in his emails to the studio.
You have a real horse's ass.
He was furious that they had Kyron say ass the way he did. Not only because his character would never say a line like this, it's so out of place, but because Riordan had been discussing this movie with 5th graders, and he told the studio that he would be horrified if he sent these young kids to see a movie with this kind of language. They had a lot of cursing too, with more ass lines, a line with shit, and a few others. And this was the one and only thing that they listened to Riordan for, and they toned it down a bit after his emails. But for this one line, they left it in, which Kyron from the books would never say. I'd also like to address Kyron's mentor role in the book versus the movie. Stories like this follow a writing structure known as the hero's journey, and a big part of that writing style and journey is based around the mentor, the role that Kyron obviously serves for Percy. In the book, Kyron was the one who proposed this quest for him, and this is a step in the writing structure called the call to adventure. The mentor sending the hero on the way is a huge moment, but in the movie, he does the opposite, telling Percy that he can't go on the quest, making Percy leave on his own without telling anybody. Not only does this mess up the classic archetype storytelling Riordan was going for, but it also goes against one of the core aspects of the series, prophecies and quests. To go on a quest, you need to go before the Oracle of Delphi to get a prophecy. You need permission from Kyron, and it's a huge deal. But in the movie, they disregard both the prophecy and the idea of the entire camp sending the heroes on their way, giving them supplies, advice, and support before leaving. This is a huge part of Percy Jackson, and to just disregard that is very disappointing. Another Kyron scene that really bothered me was when Percy faced Mrs. Dodds. In the book, Kyron came in, threw Percy Riptide, and left, letting Percy prove himself as a hero. He gave him a chance to overcome his first hurdle as a demigod, and Percy sliced her down. But in the movie, Kyron doesn't give Percy a weapon, and this leads to Percy having to be saved by Grover and Kyron. Instead of letting Percy have his moment, Kyron threatens Mrs. Dodds and she flies away, Percy having done absolutely nothing. And then he gives Percy the sword after the battle. What's the point at that point? Also, the moment of when Kyron officially gave Percy Riptide is a small detail that really bothered me. In the book, Kyron takes Riptide back after the Mrs. Dodds situation, and then he gives it to Percy right before his quest. This is the moment where he realizes that Percy is the one the great prophecy is about, and in the hero's journey writing structure, the moment of the mentor giving the hero his weapon is a big deal. But in the movie, he gives it to Percy in the museum, but as I said, he gives it to him after the fight with Mrs. Dodds was over. If he had given it to him during the attack like in the book, at least then he could have fought, proven himself, and kept the sword after earning it. But here, he hasn't done a thing to earn the sword, whereas in the book, he took down Mrs. Dodds, beat the Minotaur, took its horn off, and had been brave enough to accept his quest. All of this just shows a lack of understanding in the writing structure and style that Riordan constructed for the series. And considering the fact that the blame for this 100% goes to the screenwriter, a man whose job it is to understand writing styles is just pathetic. Do your job. This is your career. In this movie, I noticed some pretty stupid writing decisions. One thing that really just throws the story off is having two scenes at Percy's mom's house and with Gabe. In the book, we only had one scene for this, and it worked, that's all you need. But they for some reason decided to place a very unneeded scene before the field trip sequence. We don't need a Gabe scene before and after the museum, just choose one. It ate up so much screen time that could have been better spent with some other things that they cut out. Things that actually added a lot to the story and the lore of this world. And going off of that, one of my biggest complaints about this movie is that it's boring. They took the basic plot of the story, granted with a lot of dumb changes, but they didn't get what I like to call the factor, the thing that made the book so good. They cut major scenes that made the story super original, like the scene where Percy saw the three Fates cutting the life force string, or Krusty's waterbed emporium, Krusty being revealed to be the giant Procrustes, and even seeing Cerberus in the underworld would have been great. I feel as though they also missed a great opportunity with the reveal of Kyron being a centaur. In the book, he talks to Percy for a while in his human form, and then there's this big moment where he comes out of his wheelchair, shocking both Percy and the audience. In the movie though, we see him already in a centaur form running with a herd of other centaurs, which by the way is another blatant disregard for the source material, because it clearly states in the book that there are no other centaurs at Camp Half-Blood, because others, unlike Kyron, are like wild animals. A wild and barbaric folk to be exact, according to Kyron, something that makes Kyron even more unique and special, which the movie just took away. My biggest complaint with them cutting great moments though, is they took these amazing moments in the story and skipped over them in the most simple way like they were nothing. For example, one of my favorite moments in this book is when Poseidon claims Percy as his son. He gets a glowing trident over his head and everybody there bows down to him. It's a huge moment and would have been amazing to see on the big screen. But in the movie, they reveal this in one simple line.
My father's Poseidon.
Making that factor that the book had diminish. They also do this with revealing Percy to be a demigod. In the book, Riordan slowly built up to this moment with an exchange between Percy and Annabeth, and when Percy came to this realization, he was described as feeling tingling in his limbs. It was a big moment and a big realization for Percy, but in the movie, when Grover just reveals it,
You're a demigod!
Percy didn't even question it. He's just like, oh, okay, cool. And that was it. Another time they did this was revealing Luke to be the lightning thief, the thing that the book is named after. Again, they just do this with a tiny line of dialogue like it was nothing.
Luke stole the lightning bolt.
I think we're done here.
But in the book, we again have this slow build-up as Luke reveals his true intentions to Percy, while a poisonous scorpion from Tartarus crawls up Percy's leg. This is the way to reveal big moments like this, not with a single line of dialogue that takes away all suspense of a huge plot point. If you're even a half-decent writer, you know how to build up to this slowly so that the payoff is worth it. I'm starting to get why Riordan said that the story would not work even if it wasn't based on the book. The script itself was just not constructed well. Because he's right, the script was so terribly written. I don't know how the screenwriter got this job. I took 4 scriptwriting classes in film school, and I honestly think I could write a better script than he could. In fact, let's look and see who this guy is. Craig Titley. Oh wow, this is the same guy who wrote the live-action Scooby-Doo movie. That says a lot. I love how they credited Rick as a writer too, even though we told them what he wanted and they didn't listen to a single thing he said. It looks like Craig is not credited as writing the second Percy Jackson movie, The Sea of Monsters. I'm honestly not surprised. But anyway, back to explaining how this movie messed up. Let's go over some of the worst changes from book to movie that sort of ruined the plot. In the very first scene of the movie, we see Zeus and Poseidon argue with each other, and Zeus knows who Percy is.
If your son is the thief, I will send him to the depths of Tartarus.
But this makes no sense, because if Zeus knew who Percy was, then he would know that Poseidon broke their pact to not have any more demigod children, and that would be a whole big thing. In the book, no one knew of Percy's existence until he was claimed by his father, and that's another reason why that scene is so important and so monumental. Then in the scene right after that, we see Percy sitting at the bottom of the pool. This was the way they introduced us to Percy's powers, but it's just so boring compared to how they did it in the book. It's another example of this movie not having the oomph factor that the book had. In the book, we're introduced to Percy's powers in an interesting way, and moreover, in a way that shows him standing up to bullies. First, he makes the water from the fountain pull Nancy Boba Fett in. And then later, we see him take down a whole group of Ares children, including Clarice, when they were trying to dunk his head in a toilet. It's so much more exciting to see his powers through these moments that not only define the person that Percy would later become standing up to bullies, but in a way that shows us just how strong Percy is, rather than having us watch Percy sit at the bottom of a pool holding his breath for 1 minute and 4 seconds. That's literally how long this scene is. I timed it. We wasted over 1 minute of screen time with Percy just sitting there. Like, we get it, he can hold his breath underwater. What I want to know is what other powers does he have, because there are so many of them. Another scene they messed up was their journey to Half-Blood Hill. I had a lot of problems with this scene because they made changes that either messed up the characters or that just didn't make sense. First off, Grover being the one to lead them away from the wreckage bothered me, because in the book, he was passed out and had to be dragged by Percy and his mother. This is what made him fail the quest. That's why he had to go on another quest to prove himself. If he had done what he did in the movie, leading them to safety, he would have gotten his searcher's license, or in the movie's case, he would have gotten his horns. Then the fight with the Minotaur is sort of ruined with one unnecessary added line afterwards. Hades says that he sent the Minotaur to abduct Percy's mother.
Your mother is still alive. I sent the Minotaur to abduct her.
But if that's the case, why did he keep fighting after he got his mom? Wouldn't he have completed his mission and left? The reason why the plot hole is there is because they changed some details from the books. Hades had not sent the Minotaur to capture Percy's mother. He was just going after them because he was a monster who caught on to Percy's scent. A pretty important point because it shows why Percy needs to go to camp. It shows that the outside world is dangerous for a demigod like him. That's why he kept fighting afterwards. And had the movie not added the line of the Minotaur working for him, they would have avoided this plot hole. That's why you don't change tiny details from the source material. It can make your adaptation flawed in a lot of ways. Come on, Craig, do better. I also hate the fact that in the movie, Percy did not pull the horn off of the Minotaur. That was another huge moment for our hero that was just taken away. In the book, he pulled back and snapped it off with his bare hands. But in the movie, he didn't do it. The Minotaur did it to himself when pulling his horn out of the tree. In the scene that follows this one, the fact that Hades came before them in the first place was a stupid addition. And even if I forgive this pointless addition, I hate the form that Hades took. He should have just looked like a regular guy, just a lot taller, like the rest of the gods were. It seems like they just wanted to show off some cool CGI, and it honestly just made the audience get the wrong idea about who Hades is as a character. They made Hades out to be this villain, when really, everything in the source material pointed to him being this misunderstood character. He was fed up with running the underworld, as there were just too many people. He said he used to be a rich god, but since he had been overrun with the amount of dead people, he lost his riches, hiring more staff, opening more divisions, and trying to keep everything in order. Then everyone just jumps to the conclusion that he's the one at fault stealing the Master Bolt, when really, he's the victim who had lost his symbol of power as well with the Helm of Darkness. Percy actually says in the book that he felt sorry for Hades. That says a lot. going back to the point of this film cutting out characters and making up for that by giving their traits to other characters, much like them giving Annabeth Clarice's traits, we see this with the villains of the movie. The movie unfortunately took away the two main villains of the story, Kronos and Ares, and they gave many of their moments and motives to Hades and Luke, when really it just doesn't make sense for them to share the same ideologies. Hades doesn't want a war, because that would mean more dead people he would have to house in the underworld. It's Ares that wants the war, because obviously he's the god of war. But they of course never touch on this and make Hades be the one who wants the war, and it just doesn't work. They then give Luke Kronos' goal of overrunning the gods, which of course makes sense for Kronos because he wants the Titans to take the Olympians down. But the movie instead had Luke say that he wants his own people, meaning the demigods, to take the Olympians down and start a new age of heroes, something that would obviously never happen.
Why do you want a war of the gods?
Control. They've been in power for too long. I say it's time for our generation to take over. Remold the world in our image. A world of new heroes.
It just doesn't translate well. You can't give the motives of one character to another. That's not how it works. Especially with Luke wanting the demigods to take over. The Titans taking over makes sense because they wanted revenge on the gods for sending them to Tartarus. But most demigods don't hate the gods the way Luke does. They just don't have the same motives that Kronos and the Titans do. It's also a shame that we didn't get the climactic battle that we had in the book. We see Percy fight a freaking god and win. How cool would it be to see that on the big screen? But because they cut Ares out, we again see them giving moments of a character they cut to other characters, and we see Luke fight Percy instead. We just get this mess of a fight that literally goes against one of the biggest rules this book established, that Percy can't fly or be in the sky because he's the son of the sea, so Zeus, the ruler of the sky, would strike him down, especially because Zeus thinks Percy stole his lightning bolt. Kyron literally warns Percy not to use the flying shoes that Luke gave him. Luke meant well, Percy, but taking to the air, that would not be wise for you. So having Percy in the air for a good chunk of this battle is absolutely terrible. I guess they were going for that big superhero fight, but whoever thought of this and let this go to the final draft clearly did not read the source material very carefully. I wonder who's at fault. They also blatantly disregarded the no cell phone rule. In the book, it clearly says, Kyron says cell phones were traceable by monsters. If we used one, it would be worse than sending up a flare. But then the screenwriters for this movie were like, oh, let's make this more modern and have Percy look at the reflection of Medusa through a cell phone instead of a glass ball. But clearly, nobody looked at the source material to see how they were blatantly disregarding already established rules. This is something that you have to see when adapting a story. If not, it's just disrespectful, which is exactly what this movie is. I also hate what they did with Olympus. They make it dark and ominous like the underworld, even though it clearly states in the book that it's supposed to be a reverse copy of the palace in the underworld. The underworld was described as being black and bronze, while Olympus was described to have everything be glittering white and silver. But that's not what I'm seeing. They did the complete opposite of what they were supposed to do. And I of course have to talk about the gods. In the book, the gods don't really care about their kids as much as they should. They didn't talk to them because they didn't feel like it. Hearing this, it makes you sort of agree with Luke. The gods can be sort of cruel to their children, and they couldn't care less. And even Percy agrees on some level. It's brought up a few times through Percy's thought process. He addresses that some kids wait to be claimed by their parent for years, but sometimes it never even happens. In the movie, however, they say that the gods are forbidden to talk to their children, and that's why they don't do it. But then we see them do it anyway.
The water will give you power.
And we find out that Athena, Annabeth's mother, talked to her too.
I think my mother speaks to me sometimes. In times of trouble, I hear her voice.
I have a problem with this because this makes it seem as though the gods care even more for their kids because they're going out of their way to break the rules to have contact with them. It was such a dumb addition to have that law.
Oh, that's a stupid law.
I agree.
I also hate how Poseidon talks to Percy throughout the movie. In the beginning of the movie, he tells Percy that everything is about to change.
Everything is about to change, Percy. Everything is about to change.
This is the laziest writing you can do. It's almost as bad as the voiceover in the last Airbender film. I'm a strong believer in showing, not telling when it comes to movies. Don't tell us that things are going to change, show us. Let your visuals speak for you. Not doing that either means you think the audience is dumb, or you think your work won't speak for itself. But I especially hate Poseidon talking to Percy in the Lotus Hotel scene. In the book, Percy realizes on his own that this place is bad news. He's smart enough to put 2 and 2 together, and this ends up being one of his first trials as a hero. But the movie took this moment away from him because his father was the one who snapped him out of it, not Percy's resilience and willpower.
Don't eat the flower. It dulls the senses. Keeps you prisoner here. Look around you. Focus. Focus.
This is one of the many things I've mentioned that diminished Percy's heroics. We saw it with him not dealing with Mrs. Dodds on his own. We saw it with Percy not being the one to pull the horn off the Minotaur, both of which prove his physical strength, and now this, which was meant to show his mental strength. It's really disappointing that they make these small changes that ruin so much. They need to realize that there's a ripple effect when you change one detail when adapting already existing source material. I also hate the change they made to their journey. In the book, they went to St. Louis where they had this amazing battle on the arch. Here, we again see Percy's true power as he's poisoned, jumps from the arch into the water, survives, and he starts to realize just how powerful he is in the water, and so do we as an audience. But instead, the film took us to Nashville to see a replica of the Parthenon. I'm sure the screenwriters were thinking, we're so smart to send them here instead because it ties to Greek mythology. But no, Craig, you're actually an idiot. The strength of going to St. Louis was not only to have Percy and the audience learn about his abilities, which the Parthenon scene leaves out entirely, but in that sequence, Percy was on his own up there as Grover and Annabeth had taken the elevator down already. This is another trial on the road to being a hero for Percy, but with the Parthenon scene, they don't isolate Percy the way Riordan did in St. Louis. Had they isolated him, it might have been a different story, but they didn't. In fact, they instead give this heroic moment to Grover, who defeats the Hydra, and in the process, make Percy look like a cocky dumbass.
How flippin' awesome was that? I just killed that thing.
Killed it? You only made it worse.
What are you talking about?
Percy, when you cut off one Hydra head, 2 more grow back.
And if that wasn't enough to convince you that Craig and the studio are incompetent, they again break one of the biggest rules this novel puts forth, having Percy use the flying shoes again. And on top of that, they picked a monster that literally shows up in the next novel. So did they just not read the series or what? Breaking this down, Rick calling them out for not reading the other 4 novels seems pretty accurate. There were many laughable moments in this movie, and they were not meant to be funny. Like when Zeus says there's no lightning to go with the thunderclouds.
Thunderclouds.
But no lightning.
But literally 2 minutes before that, they showed lightning in the clouds. Medusa's look is hilarious. I can't take her seriously with those sunglasses. In the book, she was mysterious with her whole body being covered, and it was much more sinister than this laughable look. Then there's the moment where everybody just stands aside to let Percy get the flag, all because he beat one person in battle. Do you know how seriously campers at Camp Half-Blood take capture the flag? They trade privileges like shower times, chore schedules, and the best slots for activities to ensure they have the best players and alliances to win. And you're telling me that they all just stand aside and let Percy take the flag like that? I don't think so. Or right before that when Annabeth took Percy down and they all cheer while Percy basically looks dead on the ground. Then there's the most uncomfortable and awkward scene where Persephone takes a liking to Grover.
I'll take very good care of him.
That made me cringe pretty hard. But perhaps the dumbest moment takes place when Luke says he's never met his dad.
My dad's a jerk. I've never met him.
But seconds later, he says he broke into his dad's house to get the flying shoes.
But I once broke into my dad's house. Got some cool stuff.
First of all, Craig, what made you think that Hermes would have a house? And even if this house did exist, that Luke could find it, break in, and steal from it when he hadn't even met his father before? This movie is one of the worst adaptations I've ever seen. They had blatant disregard for the source material, broke so many established rules, changed plot points that led to giant plot holes, left things out that should have been kept in, and added stupid things that should have been kept out. Going through this movie was a lot, and I still have a whole nother movie that might even be worse than this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm just here to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed to the left. If you want to be featured on the next video, plus get a bunch of other things like previews and behind the scenes, become a patron today. Also, you can follow me on social media to see more of my personal life, like my cute dog Loki. I also do some fun stuff on TikTok and Twitter that I think you guys would really enjoy if you enjoy what I do here on this channel. As always, if you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe, and look out for more great Movie Flame videos on the way.